So you record. All right. And then I'm going to open up my slideshow and be ready when you're ready.
All right. Welcome, folks. My name's Trevor Ramos. I'm the author of How to Get Free Money for College. So I'm, every once in a while I'll do a webinar, or I guess you could call it a series, where we'll explore a topic regarding college admissions, scholarships, grants, college funding, paying for college, even, financial solutions for people. And this webinar, I wanted to talk to you about ROTC scholarships. So I brought in a great friend of mine. She is an expert on ROTC scholarships because it is a cool niche. And her name is Lisa Hillhouse. She's brings 28 years of educational experience, ranging from elementary and as a college educator to senior college, even to a senior college admissions officer, and as a admissions division director. So her background includes a bachelor's degree in politics at Assumption College, a master's in human relations with a college counseling, with a counseling emphasis at the University of Oklahoma, and she was a college and career planning graduate through UC Berkeley certificate program. So her previous work includes both undergraduate and graduate admissions at 3 Bay Area colleges, and that's University of California, Berkeley, UC Berkeley, St. Mary's College of California, and Holy Names University. And Lisa spent 20 years mentoring and recruiting officer candidates at U.S. Air Force Academy and the Air Force ROTC. So we'll talk about that. Her experience includes first generation traditional age students, enlisted military members, transfer students, working adults seeking their degrees. And Lisa's clients have a wide range of goals and talents. So we're going to focus this conversation on how to get a ROTC scholarship. Maybe when you visited your college campus, or when you've looked at some of the materials, you might have seen students walking around in military uniform, but there's a whole story behind that, of the opportunity comes from that, and also the money that comes from that, as well as some advantages you could have in the admissions process. So without further ado, I'm going to transfer this over to Lisa, and we'll get you to share your screen here.
Absolutely. All right, thank you. Well, welcome everybody. I know some of you are on the East Coast, some on the West Coast. I really appreciate your time today. I'm Lisa Hillhouse, and I'm an independent educational consultant, and I work with students in high school, students in college, sometimes post-college, who want to become military officers, and also students who are not interested in the military, but this is about 45% of my students want to become officers. As Trevor said, I'm a Service Academy and ROTC expert. I don't often get to give a whole presentation about ROTC. So as an ROTC alum, this is near and dear to my heart, and I'm really excited to share this with you. And you can see it well, right, Trevor?
Oh, perfectly.
Perfect. Okay. And Trevor will kind of jump in if he's got some questions too throughout. So to give you an idea what we're going to talk about today, a little bit about my background and why ROTC was so impactful, and then go over ROTC commissioning programs, specifics about the college scholarships, but not too specific because things are constantly changing. If the pandemic and government shutdowns have taught us anything, it's to be flexible. So we'll talk more in general terms. Then I'll also talk to you about how to be competitive to earn a scholarship. That'll be the tail end of our presentation. And lastly, talk about in-college options if you don't get a scholarship or if you're too late as a high school senior to get one. So for me, I work with some really amazing students, and often they're in 8th grade and they want to be an aerospace engineer, or maybe they start flying their sophomore year in high school so they can become military pilots. I did not know really about the military and those opportunities, and I didn't have that really specific goal. But I did go to college wanting to help people and to live and work overseas. And those are two big parts of being in the military. And then my freshman year, my big sister mentor in the dorm was the Air Force ROTC cadet recruiting officer. And she kind of tagged me and said, I think you'd be great at this. And I walked onto the program my second semester. While there, I received a full tuition scholarship. I was a politics major, and so that is kind of an area that's a little bit harder to get a scholarship, not being STEM. And just had unparalleled opportunities to travel and explore and challenge myself in college. And then on top of that, I had real mentoring and guidance to help support me in what I wanted to do and to keep me accountable. And so that's just some of the many benefits. And then when I commissioned, I had a job waiting for me at a time where there weren't a lot of jobs in the civilian world, and, a job that I never could have matched right out of college. And so ROTC and the Air Force have absolutely changed my life. And so that's why I'm so passionate about it. In the Air Force itself, I spent over 26 years, both active duty, which is the full-time military, and in the reserves. Much of my career was in the reserves, and that's where, for me, I worked 1 weekend a month serving and then 2 weeks in the summer. So some students in Army ROTC can choose to go that route, but in general, Air Force, Navy, and Marine Corps go active duty, so full-time, but Army ROTC cadets can also go active duty. And then in the military, I had a chance to teach ROTC at Cal. So I've seen it from the cadet perspective and the commander leadership perspective. And then I've also, as Trevor said, worked in admissions. And then we've already talked a little bit about what I do, but all the things I'm talking about today are things that I can possibly help you with. So often people don't know what an officer is. Maybe they don't come from a military family. Military members are less than 3% of the population. So I put a picture of Marine Corps rank up there, but it shows you what you become in the military. So when you are commissioned, that's as an O1, as a second lieutenant. The Navy calls them ensigns, but we call them second lieutenants in the other branches. And you can see some of those ranks: captain, lieutenant, colonel, general. An officer is very different in terms of roles and responsibility from an enlisted person. So about 80% of the military, it kind of varies by branch, is enlisted. So that means they're coming generally right out of high school. They're going to be educated in a specific skill and become, a real expert in that area. Whereas officers are more generalist. There are some exceptions, like a pilot is a specialist on their aircraft, or a nurse, for example. But most officers, are going to be leaders and managers and overseeing a lot of different specialties. When you become an officer, you're outranking the majority of the military. Just that first day you enter in, and you're going to be having all this responsibility you wouldn't have in the civilian world. So if you went on to a military base, for example, Travis up in Fairfield, California, you would have a legal officer, you would have military police, you would have an accountants, you would have logisticians, IT people, engineers, physicians, et cetera. So those are just examples of jobs that officers have, whereas your enlisted personnel would be the law enforcement agents, they would be bookkeepers, they would be EMTs, things like that. So you're entering in a more professional role. Okay, so what is ROTC? So when people say ROTC, they often think about the Army, but it also includes the Navy program, which has an option to become a Marine, and Air Force. There's no Coast Guard ROTC, so that's the one branch we don't have in there. And the Space Force is pulling out of the Air Force, our newest branch. So ROTC is traditionally a 4-year in-college program where you're beginning at the start of your freshman year, although you can join like 1 or 2 semesters later. That's not as ideal, better to start early. But you're a full-time student at a school that has ROTC or has a crosstown. So for example, when I taught at Cal, that was the host school. We had both Army, Navy, and Air Force there. And then we each had crosstown programs. So Navy students came from Davis, they came from Stanford, but that was the only Navy crosstowns. Whereas the Air Force, who tends to have more crosstown opportunities, we had St. Mary's College, we had Sonoma State, we had the University of the University of San Francisco. We had about 26 crosstowns. Army also tends to do a lot of crosstown schools, which increases your chance to be an ROTC if you're not attending that one host school. Students can enter ROTC in any major. In my program, as a cadet, we had 125 cadets. I was the only non-technical person in my program. Everybody else was a STEM major. So it's usually not that imbalanced, but you can go in. I've had students get scholarships for finance, for chemistry, for Arabic, things like that. So again, a lot of STEM, but you can apply to any major. This picture here, these are current ROTC cadets and midshipmen. And so I thought it really highlighted some of the things you're going to do in these programs. Obviously, each program is a little more specific, but on the top left, you have Army cadets doing a change of command. So in ROTC, you create a wing or a battalion with the students that would look like you would have on a base. So cadets or midshipmen would have leadership positions, like they could be the finance officer, they could be the director of training, they could be the director of athletics. So this is where the leadership is transitioning. To the right, you have Air Force ROTC cadets taking part in a cyberspace operation. So cyber is really important to all the military branches, but that's a specific competition they were doing. On the right, you have some Navy midshipmen and they're drilling, just marching. And I think this is actually a parade that they're doing. On the bottom left, you have some Army ROTC cadets who are working on their marksmanship skills. Then in the middle, you have Air Force ROTC cadets. They're doing what's called a leadership reaction course. This is where you have a chance to work on your leadership and teamwork, physical skills and communication, and you solve obstacles. And then the last one on the right, you have some Navy midshipmen and also Marine students as well doing physical fitness training, which is a part of all those programs. So this is just an example of what you could be doing during the week in ROTC or on the weekend if you're doing some training. All right, so a little bit more about what ROTC activities consist of. So when a student's in ROTC, they're going to pick one program like Navy or Marine or Air Force or Army. And they are going to be registered for academic classes, which are elective credits. And in some schools, you'll get a minor in that program, like aerospace studies. And so your military classes will be anywhere from 1 to 3 units. So 3 units would be more like upperclassmen versus freshmen. And you're going to study things like in the Air Force, the history of air and space power. If it was in the Navy, it'd be talking about naval supremacy, naval power. You're going to also have things like leadership techniques, management styles, ethics and values. How do you solve difficult situations? You may be studying topics like sea navigation or land navigation. You might be studying terrorism. There's just so many different things you're doing to prepare to be a leader. Then you also have physical fitness training that tends to be 2 to 3 times a week, often early, like 5 or 6 a.m. before classes. And that's to keep students in shape and also kind of build that camaraderie and discipline. And then you're going to also have a weekly leadership lab. So the leadership lab is where the upperclassmen train and mentor and evaluate the underclassmen. So just like in the military, you have the officers in the leadership roles and the enlisted who are their followers as they build their leadership. The underclassmen are kind of that enlisted role, whereas the upperclassmen are officers. In terms of a time commitment, I would say if you looked at all the required things you had to do, it would be about 7 hours a week for ROTC. But as you progress through the ranks and take on more leadership, it might be more like 10 or 12, in some cases like 14 hours a week if you had a really big job in the program. The idea is that in ROTC, you are always a student first because we need you to graduate and do well so that you can go on and serve. So ROTC is going to prioritize that. Also, students often have one block of time, like maybe Friday mornings or Wednesday afternoons, where they do much of this training, and maybe PT would be other mornings. But the idea is not that you're doing something every day with this. Like your job is as a full-time student. Each ROTC program has different opportunities. So in the Navy, every summer you do a cruise. So you are there for 3-4 weeks as part of your training, learning about the enlisted roles in the military, the officer roles, and then focusing on career exploration. Army does special training in the summer. You could go to jump school, things like that, training along other Army members. And then in the Air Force, it's one summer program where you have a few weeks of a leadership evaluation camp, but then there's lots of extra programs you could do, like interning with the Pentagon, doing engineering research, doing nursing work, things like that. So each program is a little different, but they have that same end result, to serve as an officer. Okay. All right, the next one. So here you can see kind of in a COVID world what our ROTC might look like. Those students are in khakis and polo shirts. So for Air Force, they may be brand new students that don't have their uniforms yet. But ROTC is going to emphasize some really important life skills and then some other key things. So number one, you really need to know how to manage your time and set goals. And that's really what's going to lead to academic success. So if you're a parent or counselor looking at this, you could see this is great. Kids come into ROTC, they have a defined time they have to graduate in. They need to stay on track, be full-time students, have really great behavior. In some ways, it's like a dream for parents, right? A little bit less to worry about. We also look at character development and ethics, leadership training, looking at different careers. So officers may come in and say, what is it like to be a surface warfare officer? What is it like to be a nuclear sub officer? You're going to also have people coming and talking about current events, like maybe someone deployed to Syria, and they're going to talk about that experience. We talked about physical fitness and health, teamwork and communication. And then ultimately, in addition to building your character, preparing for service, because that's really what being in the military is all about. Okay. Oops, sorry. So the end result is that you are commissioned. You can see this is a group commissioning ceremony. So you have an Army officer on the left, a Naval in the center, and an Air Force on the right. And so when you do finish your 4-year degree, and then you finish your commissioning program happening at the same time, you will commission as an officer in that branch. People typically don't do a program and commission into an alternative branch. That rarely happens. So you wouldn't go through Air Force ROTC and then decide to commission into the Navy. It doesn't work like that. From there, you're going to go on to this guaranteed job, and it really depends on what branch you go into, how long you serve, but typically it's for 4 or 5 years, active duty. And then I'll talk a little more about the Army later, but as I mentioned, they can either go active duty or in the Army Reserves or the Army National Guard. All right, so who can join? If you are a high school student, you can apply for the scholarship program. If you're already in college, you can join that freshman, sophomore year at a school that has ROTC or a host. You do have to be a full-time student in good standing. So every program is going to have a little different academic requirement. Can you be under a 3.0? Do you have to be over a 3.0? You definitely have to be physically fit. So that's something students should be working on throughout high school. And then morally sound. So, students who aren't getting arrested, students who aren't involved in, illegal drug use or legal drugs, but that, are prohibited. Students making really good choices. And again, the big thing is start early. So sometimes people will come to me like at the end of their senior year, they didn't apply for a scholarship, but they want to do that in college. And we kind of work and go through like what could be some issues like your fitness or your medical health issues, things like that. Alrighty. So Kind of moving on towards some of the latter requirements for college scholarships. Every program's different. I didn't list the specifics because they're always subject to change based on both the needs of the military, and then during the pandemic, we've seen some things change as well. But if you go to the program sites, and I'll have those later, you can always find those. However, each program will have a minimum GPA. So I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have great grades in high school. So really, the better the grades, the more options you have, just like applying to college. Tests, standardized tests, are typically a requirement, and the higher those test scores are, the better. There are certain minimums. So you might qualify for the Marine ROTC scholarship to apply, but maybe not the Air Force. You also want to have leadership experience. And so leadership takes a lot of forms. And if I could kind of talk about that for a moment, leadership could be in your family. Maybe you have a single mom and you have siblings you need to take care of. Maybe your family's intact, but you have a grandma who your family cares for and you have responsibilities for her. Or maybe you need to work to help support your family. So all of those are examples of leadership. I don't want you to think leadership is only present in the student council or only being an Eagle Scout. It could be a lot of clubs, activities, or your things at home.
Quiet.
Yeah. And then in terms of character is going to be really important. Again, not using drugs, not drinking, not being in places that you shouldn't, finding the best people to be around. So they will, talk about that during the interview. It's important to know that all ROTC scholarships are based on merit, not on need. So you could be the wealthiest applicant or the other end of the spectrum, but you get this based on your academics, your leadership, your interviewing skills, things like that. A little more about the scholarships. Those applications open in the spring of the student's junior year in high school. So it really varies by program, but by the summertime after junior year, all those programs are open. And again, each of them looks at things a little different. Maybe they include what you're doing as a senior, maybe they don't, but it's important to kind of develop a resume early and each year keep increasing your activities. The deadlines vary, but they usually are December or January of a student's senior year. So you want to make sure that you are on track for that. And then you can kind of see here, some of these applications are lengthy. So the Navy ROTC application is long and it's a lot of work. I'm not going to lie. It is a full tuition scholarship. So you're working for something valuable. But on the other end, the Air Force scholarship, I feel like it's pretty quick and easy, to be honest. And the Army is kind of in between. So some examples of what these applications include would be essays about why you want to serve and your leadership and how you manage your time. Some of the programs require recommendations from certain teachers. So again, it's really important how you do at school, what you are like in that classroom. They are going to all involve a fitness test. They're going to want to see your transcript. They're going to see your test scores. There will also be a place to put your activities in there. So that's what the applications look like. So it's a little bit like an academy application in terms of all those areas, but there are no nominations from a congressperson to get an ROTC scholarship. So that's one of the big differences. Once your application's complete, all those items above, like the fitness test, et cetera, you will reach out to an officer to do an interview. That's typically at your local ROTC unit. So like here in the Atlanta area where I am, that could be Georgia Tech. But you can request to do your interview someplace else, which could be a school that you want to go to. Like if I applied to Cornell, I could request to do my interview with that unit. So just knowing that interview prep and performance is also really important.
Hey, Lisa, I had a question.
Sure.
So obviously if you're applying, well, maybe not obviously, but if you're applying directly to a college without a ROTC program, you would be applying through maybe Common App or the application. Is this a separate application?
That's a great point. It is. So each ROTC program is its own application. So if I was applying to UGA and Georgia Tech, I could apply to them both on the Common App. But then if I wanted to do Army and Navy ROTC, I'd have to open an Army ROTC application and a Navy. So like, for example, both those programs are at Tech, but only one of them is at UGA. So, that's part of that building of that school list, like saying, okay, do I only want schools like Purdue or Wisconsin that have every ROTC program? Like if you were applying to multiple branches, right? If you were just applying to one, you can see like Navy ROTC schools list on their site. Here's all the schools. I need to build my list off of that.
And is it typical to see a student apply to multiple branches, or does that bring up any questions in the process?
Sure. So sometimes my students will be applying to several ROTC programs or several academies and several ROTC. Sometimes they're just applying to ROTC, so it's really up to them. If you are going to an ROTC interview, they may ask, are you applying to any other program, commissioning programs? And you might say, oh, yes, I'm also applying to Army. And they may ask, where are you applying to school and things like that. I don't think you necessarily have to. I think you should apply where you've done the research and where you feel is the best fit for you. Like I only looked at Air Force. If I was going to do that over, I'd probably look really closely at Coast Guard because I feel like there's a lot there that would really interest me too. But some students, when I work with kids, we talk about, would this branch be a better fit for you than that branch? Or is what you want to do, could I do it in a lot of different places? So like the Air Force and the Navy have a lot of flying opportunities for fixed wing aircraft, for jets, but the Army has the market on helicopters. So if I want to fly helicopters, am I better off going into the Army?
Yeah, we got another question. So students who apply and get accepted to the ROTC program, are they required to join the armed forces, and kind of what does that look like?
Sure. Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. But yes, if you're in ROTC, this is a good question. So if you go in with a scholarship, your freshman year, you have the option of leaving if it's not the right program for you. But when you come back as a sophomore, if you already have a scholarship, that's where you've committed to serving, for whatever that standard is, like 4 years, 5 years. So if you're in the Army, you can ask to go into the reserves or guards, so go part-time. So maybe you're a civil engineer, you already have a job lined up and you think, I'd rather do my service part-time, you can do that. But if you're Air Force, Navy, Marine Corps, the idea is that you're going active duty to serve after. Say you don't have a scholarship when you join, you have that first year to decide. If you don't get a scholarship sophomore year, you have that sophomore year to decide. But come junior year, without a scholarship, now you're committed to that program. So you definitely can try before you buy and see if it's a good fit for you.
Yeah, and then when you talk about leadership experience, I noticed that the high school I went to had a JROTC program.
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about there, and does that help to get into the programs?
Sure. So leadership experience through junior ROTC is fabulous. Even if it's not the branch you want, maybe your school has Marine and you want to go Air Force. Another thing is kids can get leadership experience through programs like Civil Air Patrol and Sea Cadets. So these are programs that are auxiliaries of the military. So Sea Cadets is sponsored by the Navy with some support from the Coast Guard. Civil Air Patrol is sponsored by the Air Force, but it's a way for kids to have like an ROTC experience. So get that leadership, that service, that career orientation between middle school and through high school. And actually being in those programs and getting a certain rank, which would be like your Scout Awards, could actually help them get a scholarship. So yeah, that's, some really good ones to look at. But, demonstrating interest in the school, in some cases really makes an impact. So with the military, they really want to see that love. They really want to see that demonstrated interest. So if you are applying to colleges that have ROTC, If maybe you're an academy candidate and you've also applied to ROTC, that shows that interest. If you volunteer with military groups or organizations, if you join some of these, if you've done a lot of research and talked to a lot of people, that's ways when you go to your interview for them to see this kid's really motivated, and you're going to get a better score on your interview, when you show that understanding and that level of interest.
Awesome.
Cool. Awesome. Okay. A couple last things about the scholarships. So say you are a senior in high school, you get awarded your scholarship for physics for the Army. You need to make sure that, when you were applying for that scholarship, you also applied to the schools that you listed on your application. So you told the Army, I'm applying to IU and Purdue and Ohio State. So when you get that scholarship, you have to tell the Army, okay, I've gotten into Purdue, that's where I'm planning to go. Or I've applied to Purdue, I haven't heard yet, but that's where I'd like to use that scholarship. Once you get an ROTC scholarship, they send you to DODMERB. So DODMERB is the Medical Evaluation Review Board, and that is for all people who want to become commissioned officers. So then you need to get medically qualified to join ROTC. So there are definitely things that can disqualify students, certain mental health conditions, certain learning disabilities, if you need accommodations, certain things like maybe you've had surgery, but you haven't fully recovered your mobility yet. Or maybe I've had some unusual things like a student had to have a dental implant. They were in the middle of that, like they couldn't get medically qualified until that was finished. I've had students with orthodontia, they can't medically qualify till they no longer have permanent orthodontia. So sometimes there's little things that you may think, oh, is that really a big deal? Night blindness, double vision, really severe color vision could be an issue too. So it's just really important to, when you get that scholarship, to immediately do that physical, because about 25% of people fail the physical and have to do an appeal. So they might have to go see the optometrist again and get that information. So, to go into ROTC and get your scholarship started, you have to be medically qualified. You'll also, when you get a scholarship, they'll tell you, it's for this major or this general area, and that's what you use it for. So if you wanted to apply to Tulane for economics, you wouldn't ask for a scholarship for English. You would ask for the one that you want. And then another thing is, when you talk to ROTC units, so when students in high school call, they could research those sites and talk to the units and say, what additional scholarships might you have? So for example, Miami, Ohio, for Air Force ROTC, they have money in their budget for students who aren't on scholarship to give them a couple $1,000 a year to help defray their cost. Schools like Indiana, IU, Army ROTC has supplemental room and board scholarships to, help students pay their way through college. So, you can look at certain schools. Sometimes I help students, maybe they have an Air Force scholarship. It's for an in-state school. And so I'll help them find other schools like the, UMass Lowell that will let you go for the cost of an in-state student. So you definitely have to do some research about your schools and the costs and supplemental scholarships too. Okay. I wanted to kind of quickly touch on the different branches you can do ROTC in before we wrap that up. So Army here, again, if you're in high school, you can apply for a scholarship. The most competitive students get a 4-year, and then strong students will have a 3-year scholarship. If you get a 3-year scholarship from high school, that means you do ROTC as a freshman cadet on your own dime. And then maybe you have school scholarships, financial aid, and then your scholarship starts your sophomore year. So because you're not on scholarship that freshman year, you still meet the standards academically, fitness wise, health, but your scholarship starts your sophomore year. Army scholarships do something unique, which is really cool. They pay your full tuition. So if you live in Ohio, you're going to Miami, Ohio, they're not paying too much money. But if you're going to Stanford, they're paying a lot of money. And so it's full tuition for a school that has ROTC, or you can use it for room and board. So say you're a California student, you're going to San Diego State, which I think is about 7,000-ish a year for tuition, but room and board might be 16,000. So you would really benefit from using it toward your room and board there. So for ROTC, for the Army, you can elect from year to year. Do I want to use my money for tuition or do I want to use it for room and board? The room and board is up to $10,000 a year. So it's not full, but in some cases that could help people. Army also has a really generous monthly stipend students get during the school year to help with their expenses and a book allowance as well. And then again, you can do any major, but there is STEM and there's a high need for foreign area studies and foreign languages, especially Arabic, Farsi, Mandarin, different things like that, Portuguese, etc. So that could be something for some students. And then Army is really in a lot of schools and a lot of crosstowns. I mentioned earlier that Army is the one branch where you can either go active duty, which you have to compete for. So you need to be strong in your program, or in the reserves or in the Guard. And then that amount of service time you have depends on what option you take. So if you said, I want to just go in the reserves, you could be doing 8 years of the reserves versus a couple of years of active duty for Army. Navy and Marine Corps. So when you apply for the scholarship, you're either applying for the Navy scholarship or the Marine. You can't apply for both. It's one or the other. Some majors are not going to be in certain programs. Like if you wanted to be a nurse, you would need to be in the Navy nursing program. The Marine Corps doesn't give scholarships for nursing. So, it depends by branch what they offer. They are full 4-year tuition scholarships. So they are really the most competitive because they're, the most valuable. And again, a lot of STEM majors, especially engineering, math, physics, IT. Navy has the least amount of host schools and a very small amount of crosstown schools. And Air Force ROTC and Army will have programs where you could be at a community college. So you could be going to Cuesta while you prepared to transfer to, say, UC Santa Barbara, but the Navy typically doesn't do that. Also, Navy ROTC does have summer tours every summer that you go on. And when you graduate, you serve for 5 years. So they're a little bit longer service commitment than Air Force or Army, but not by much. Okay, lastly, Air Force ROTC. Like Army, these are 3 or 4-year scholarships. There's different types of scholarships in those categories. So you can get full tuition, so whatever school you get to, in-state, out-of-state, public, private, or you can get a 4-year in-state scholarship. So that might mean I live in New York and I get a 4-year scholarship that I could use at SUNY Maritime or some other New York State school. But if I want to go to a different school, I could take that and say, do you offer in-state tuition? So I mentioned like UMass Lowell will offer in-state tuition for an ROTC cadet. Another example is the University of Oklahoma. They have all ROTC programs. They will let you pay in-state tuition. So that could make your scholarship go farther because maybe you want to get out of New York. It might be too cold for you. Maybe the major you want's not there. Also, they do 3-year scholarships for $18,000 a year. So say I went to Marquette University, I already received $25,000 a year from them in scholarship money just based on my academics, then this scholarship could be on top of that. So it could be stackable. Air Force has a heavy emphasis on STEM majors, and again, the foreign languages and cultures. And each military branch kind of has different foreign languages and cultures that matter to them, but Mandarin and Arabic are always clear winners with all the branches, if that's something you want to do. And Air Force also offers a lot of detachments and a lot of crosstowns. And then when you graduate, you're serving for 4 years. And I know, Trevor, people think 4 years is forever. My whole life will be over by then. 4 years is a blink of the eye. When you're 18, it might seem like a long time, but trust me, it is not.
Right. And we had another question. So is dyslexia or reading disorder an issue for any of the branches?
So when you go to your medical exam, they will give you a card and you will read it. And so if you're fluent in that, you will pass and dyslexia won't be. As long as you don't need accommodations in the classroom or for your standardized tests. A lot of the students I work with have learning differences, but they've really learned to compensate and, adjust over the years to succeed. So if it's not impairing your work, then that's not an issue. Mhm. Good question. And ADHD and ADD is often asked about too. I would say there's a good amount of people in the military with ADD or ADHD. And I think sometimes they're drawn to it because things are constantly evolving. There's a lot of adventure, there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of different opportunities. It's very hands-on. So in some cases, that's a really good fit for people like that, as long as they don't need to use medication, again, can't have accommodations. Okay. Awesome. So here's really where I would focus on if you're interested in a scholarship, like what would make you competitive. And these are things that I work with students all the time on to help them get their best chance for a scholarship. So first part, kind of researching the program. So I always sit down with students and say, let's look at the website for the service you want to go to. That says Army websites, but it could be whatever service you want. Look at the school site, look at goarmy.com, look at army.mil, the official news source. I go with students and say, these are my favorite websites for these programs, and just really see what's the mission, what are the career opportunities, what's the lifestyle. The next step in that would be reading some military books. So I often have a list I recommend, but figuring out, what is like life as an Apache helicopter pilot? Do I really want to be a trauma surgeon? Am I a good fit for being at sea? So what is that lifestyle like? Another way to find out is talking to as many cadres, so officers in these programs, and cadets and midshipmen. It's very easy to see where the programs are. You can call up. They all have unit recruiting or admissions officers, and they're always happy to do like a Zoom interview and say, hey, you want to talk about joining ROTC at SUNY Maritime? Let's set a time up to talk about what that can mean for you. I have a list of questions that I send my students, and it's like, this is what I would ask, and let's brainstorm some that, you have too, so that they can make a good choice when they're going through this process. And then also you can reach out to units like Clemson and say, hey, I'm interested in Army ROTC. I'd like to sit in on your military science class and leadership lab, follow a cadet for a day. It was easier when it was in person, but those are going on virtually at a lot of schools, or going on in person now. So sitting in on that. And these are things you could be doing throughout high school to help you decide where you want to go. The next one, build on your experience. So we talked about building your leadership. So I look at that, not only what happens in your home, but community service through athletics. And so maybe you are a competitive marathoner, or maybe you're really big into mountain biking and are in the mountain biking club. But it also might be that, you're great at track and field, or you're on the football or softball team. Athletics really teaches unity and cohesion and communication, not just the fitness, the discipline, the camaraderie, and all of that's important to the military. So if you are not in a sport, you really need to show a high level of fitness and the ways that you've gotten those benefits. Employment's also really important. A lot of high schoolers don't work for various reasons, and so that really sets you apart. And then activities that you love. And so whether that's the newspaper or drama or dance or something else. Lastly, there's a lot of military groups out there that would love to have help from students. And so I mentioned Sea Cadets and Civil Air Patrol. They often volunteer for military events, but there's groups like Blue Star Moms, there's Operation Gratitude. There's different groups you can get involved in to kind of serve your community and learn more about the military. And I think if you have those kind of things in your resume, that really sets you apart. The last part is you've researched, you've built your resume throughout high school. So now, having that resume in one place for your interview and your application, being able to talk about, why you want to go in this branch, what you want to do, what your long-term goals are. really practicing. So I spend a good amount of time on interview prep with my students. I also have other officers who work with me who I can send students to them as well. And they're all people who've evaluated for these scholarships before. So just being confident and being able to, in an eloquent way, get your message apart and, ace that interview, because you could be great on paper and have a terrible interview and you're not going to get a scholarship. The last thing is apply early. So the scholarship boards begin as early as September, October of a student's senior year. It can vary by branch. So if you can get your application in August or September, you're going to have, something quality. You're going to have a chance to go to that board. If you're not picked up, you'll go to a second one. But if you apply to the very last board of the year in March, and that's the only board, you've missed a couple chances to compete. So it is definitely important to apply early.
Yeah, so on that, Lisa,
Yeah.
that's one of the things that I want to make sure everyone understands. So, usually if you want to do this, or if you want to apply to college, for instance, you're going to be looking at an early action deadline, maybe an early decision
Right.
deadline or regular decision, and so early action would be obviously in October, November, and then some schools take applications in January. Are there any early deadlines for this process that you have to be aware
Sure.
of?
So you definitely have to start your application before, by December of your senior year. And then typically they have to be done no later than January of your senior year. Sometimes there's a little bit more leeway in that depending on the program. But your paperwork has to get assembled at the headquarters, then it has to go before a board. So just the earlier you can apply, the better. So I would say this is something they should be working on in the summer and the fall in conjunction with their college applications. But your point about early decision, that's something, because it's binding, I would absolutely be talking to the ROTC unit and saying, I'm applying ED to this school, University of Richmond, do you have any sway with admissions and so on, and I would also want to get my ROTC scholarship in early, because there's definitely schools that will be able to have a little bit of weight with admissions. So, I have a girl this year who got an Army ROTC scholarship at the first board for Arabic, and Cornell reached out and they're like, are you interested in applying here? And like, we can help facilitate your application. I mean, that's, look how hard it is to get into Cornell, right? But she already had a scholarship very early. When she got that scholarship, IU called her and said, we saw that you're in our applicant pool. We have supplemental room and board scholarships. When she applied to other colleges and she had that scholarship, she let admissions know. So in some cases, like Georgetown said, we don't take that into account, but other schools were like, we're super happy and we're going to add that to your file, because now you're a full pay person, right? You don't have a financial need, and that's a win for the school. Also, if you are in a contract to graduate in 4 years and you have to show good moral character, like what school isn't going to want you, right? You're like minimal risk for them. Yeah, that's a great question. Okay, here's the links. You can just Google, for example, Navy ROTC scholarship and get to it. On the right side, I put a note in there. The pandemic has changed requirements. It's changed deadlines. It's changed interview board dates. So again, the earlier people apply, the better. We saw that last year. We saw that this year. Also, in the last few years, we've had a couple government shutdowns. And for students applying for Navy in particular, there were some issues a few years back where scholarship boards were very delayed, and some people found out the results after the May 1st deadline because we were on a government shutdown. So, you don't want to be applying at the tail end of that pool, for the last board. You want to apply early, just in case things outside your control happen. All right, final tips. Begin your search early. So if you're applying for any ROTC scholarship, work on your school list and make sure that there's going to be some overlap. Another tip is, like where you are, Trevor, in Southern California, a lot of traffic, right? You can have a crosstown school that's 20 miles away, but is an hour and a half by traffic, right? So I'm not sure I'd want to be at that crosstown school if it's going to take me an hour and a half to get to ROTC. So just think about those things. Think about, does that school offer merit scholarships? Do they have incentives? Also, take the most rigorous classes you can take in high school where you can succeed. Don't take Calc AB if math's your worst subject and you are applying for a Mandarin major. Maybe you can take AP stats. Make sure you have plenty of science. Make sure you've taken a computer science class that's more programming. Foreign languages, especially unique ones like Portuguese, Japanese, will really make you stand out on an application. Also, build a resume, as we talked about, that incorporates any of that military activity, whether it's junior ROTC, one of these other programs, whether it's a military summer camp, whether it's volunteering. If you are a current student in high school, and I know how difficult testing is, especially for California and other parts of the country, please try to prepare early and take your standardized test early. It's just going to open more doors for you. And, it's not really going away for the military academies and ROTC. It's altering a little bit. But if you can kind of end your junior year with a strong GPA and a test score you're really happy with, that makes it easier for you to get that scholarship application in early. So this year I have a different student who applied for Arabic, and she couldn't put in her ROTC application until she could test. And she's up in the Northeast, and she had to go to a couple different states to try and test before she can get her scholarship app in. So, and that was through no fault of her own. She had been scheduled through the spring. So just, plan, because these are uncertain times. Last few things, stay in touch with your ROTC unit or your scholarship coordinator. When I work with students, we work really hard to have very authentic and very knowledgeable essays about what they want to do. I can't tell you how many times people have told me, I want to be a Navy SEAL, and they're like, but I want to drive tanks and I'm looking forward to being a private. The Navy doesn't have tanks. Privates are Army rank. Like, that would be a really incongruent essay. So, make sure you have your facts right. Check your deadlines, double check them because they could change. Do interview prep, whether it's with your school counselor, a private counselor, an uncle, a friend who's in the military, your ROTC instructor. And last but not least, plan for the unexpected. That's, very much a military idea there. Last thing, if you don't get a scholarship in high school, you can still enroll in Army ROTC. Again, or Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines. You need to be a full-time student at a school with the program, good academics, good moral character, physically fit, but you can walk on during the first 2 years of the program if you don't have a scholarship. So we always have that backup. But, you do have to compete for a scholarship or a spot in the program. So, after those 2 years, if you don't have a spot to commission, or if you don't have a scholarship which includes your spot, you would have to leave that program. Okay, just a few fun facts here. Many people don't know that most officers come through ROTC from, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines. Also, many people enter ROTC without a scholarship, but get one once they're there. And then if you talk to leaders on campuses, they often say their cadets and midshipmen are a really big leadership force on the campus. They're real great role models, which I think is important. And again, many colleges will do incentives for, students with scholarships to come there. So it's absolutely worth doing your research on that. Okay, questions?
Yes, we do have questions.
Okay.
First, can you have a food allergy?
If it is a life-threatening allergy where you need to carry an EpiPen, you would have to ask for a waiver, but that would be difficult to get. If it's not something that's life-threatening, it's going to be less of an issue. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have a favorite book to recommend for high schoolers to read about this lifestyle or process?
Oh, let's see, about this lifestyle. Okay. There's some that are about the academies. There's one which, it's going to have a lot of overlap with the training. So I would say Absolutely American has been around for a really long time. That's a great book about West Point, but it really just also talks about life in the Army. Gosh, it's funny, I'm Air Force, but I have a lot of Army recommendations. What else? There's an Army fiction book. It's called Spirit Mission. It is a really great book about cadets' time at West Point and how it flashes forward to the future and how cadets would do spirit missions. So something like against Navy, their big rival, but it talked about what would you be willing to do for your comrades and risks you would take for them. For Air Force and for Navy, off the top of my head, I'm not coming up with anything, but I would say one of my favorite things is each chief of staff of the military is going to have their reading list. And the Air Force in particular has an amazing reading list with books, not just on air power, but on current events, on leadership, things like that. So yeah, I don't have a specific one for those two, but yes.
Okay, awesome. So next question is, after the 4 years of service, will the students be called to the Army again at any time?
Sure. So when you do your initial service, you have an inactive period of time, and it's a couple of years. You could be recalled. In recent times, when we were really involved in Iraq and Afghanistan, some people were recalled from the Army during that, IRR period. It's individual ready reserve. It typically doesn't happen with the Navy or the Air Force. But there is that possibility you could, but they would have to exhaust all the people who are already in the reserves or guard, to do that. Mhm. So
Is it
yeah, so
possible?
typically it's not, it doesn't happen typically.
Okay. Um, is it possible to join the National Guard and do ROTC simultaneously?
Yes, there's an Army green to gold program. So green for Army to gold as the gold bars lieutenants. And you could be in an Army unit, get money to go to school through your service, and get a scholarship to be both in the reserves and going to school. The only issue is sometimes if there's a big conflict and the Army needs you to deploy, you would have to take a leave from school. So that's a program where you're typically in the reserves or guard, and then you jump into ROTC, versus like a traditional high school or a college student. But that is, a pretty popular green to gold program. So sometimes Army bases will be near a school and they'll bring in some enlisted personnel who are training to become officers. And that's great because you're getting a lot of operational and real world relevancy with your training.
Mhm.
Yes. But
And
the other branches, Navy and Air Force Marines, will let airmen and sailors and Marines compete for ROTC scholarships, and they'll let them out of the active duty world to go to ROTC. So I've had some of those students myself.
okay. Do you work with kids throughout USA or just in your area?
Oh, okay. So I'm based in Atlanta, but I work with students throughout the US. Right now, I have a student in Central America and one in Europe as well who want to become ROTC or Academy cadets or mids. And so the ones who are abroad are US citizens, right? So to do this program and get commissioned, you ultimately have to have your citizenship.
Okay. Can you, if you don't have a slide, can you put like your contact information in the
Sure.
chat?
Yeah, I have that right here. So yes, so on my website, Hillhouse College Advising, there's a media link and there's a bunch of articles I've either written or been in. There's some podcasts and some webinars. So they're kind of a combination of ROTC and Academy information, and they're all a little bit different focus. So, there's a lot of good free resources there. So absolutely take a look at that media link. But yes, if you've enjoyed this and learned from it today, I'm happy to do a free initial consult too. So just, reach out and I'd be happy to do that.
Okay. And what are the advantages and disadvantages of going straight to the military compared to ROTC?
Oh, so you're talking about like enlisting at a high school? Yeah. So if you are enlisting, you're typically saying, like, I'm not ready to go right to college, just, for a lot of different reasons. Maybe it's financial, maturity, not sure what I want to do. If you're going in, you're going to have that guaranteed job for a couple of years. It really depends what branch or service you do, could be 3, 4, 5 years. You're going to get a skill that's marketable, and you're going to also have the chance to get the GI Bill where you can have money for college after and really great benefits. So if you're not ready, or you don't know what you want to do, or you don't have the money, or a combination, I think that's a really good option. And that time that you served honorably would count when you become an officer and give you higher pay based on every 2 years of service that you were in as well. So I've also worked with enlisted people. Like I had a girl who was in the Marines, left active duty, used her GI Bill, and then went through Air Force ROTC and then became a space officer. So people definitely do that. Yeah, because you don't always know what you want to do, or you're not ready, or maybe you want to have some time to have a little bit of that adventure, you know?
Yeah. Okay. And so, and then what would be the difference between the advantages compared to ROTC versus the Naval Academy?
Ooh, okay. So lots of great things. When I was a student in college, I knew about West Point, but I didn't know about the other academies at all because I grew up in the East Coast. And didn't really have that much military in my family. The academy is a very immersive 24/7 environment. So, you are wearing uniforms to classes, you are marching to lunch, you're doing training on Saturday. So it is an all in, it's, 110% challenge. Um, to be eligible for an academy, you have to be a top student, you have to be a great leader, you have to be an athlete. Sometimes students have some of that, sometimes they don't have all of that. Maybe they were interested in the academy, they didn't get a congressional nomination, which you need to get appointed to an academy. Some people think, I want to be a naval officer or a Marine, but I don't, need that. I'm already disciplined. Or maybe they're like, I want a traditional experience. Like I want to go to an SEC school and I want to be in marching band, or I want to be in Greek life, or I want to, go to those kind of things. And, that's not congruent with like going to an academy, right? It's going to be a little different experience. So again, most officers come from ROTC. I think it's a great option, especially if you're not sure what you want to do, or you want that more typical experience. I've had kids who are like, I'm only applying to ROTC because both my parents and my grandparents went to this college, and that's where I want to go. And I can still get that same end result. So I think I think many people could do great at ROTC, but I don't think the academy is for everybody.
Right, right.
Right.
If you're interested in a school without a ROTC program, but has a cross-school association for ROTC, can you still obtain a ROTC scholarship for the cross school?
Sure, for sure. So you just make sure that, it's going to be easy. You can get into the crosstown school, make sure it's going to be easy for you to get there. So for example, if you went to Rhodes College, but you wanted to do Air Force ROTC at the University of Memphis, you could commute. It's not very far. You could Uber, take public transit, but, say you're at Carroll College in Montana and University of Montana is an hour and a half away. Like you got to get yourself there. So you got to be able to do that. Sometimes it's harder for students if there's not a lot of other cadets or midshipmen at their school because they don't feel that unity and that connection. But then in some cases, like Sacramento State has a great Air Force program, and many cadets are from there, but a lot are from UC Davis, which isn't far away. And so those Davis cadets do their fitness training together, and then they commute over together, so they have that camaraderie that way. So yeah, you just have to make sure it's going to be doable for you. But yeah, there's definitely schools that have really big crosstowns. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, what percent of kids get the ROTC scholarship that apply?
Ooh, it's so it's going to vary by year. I think this year is going to be a blip because some kids weren't eligible because of standardized test scores. But I would probably say it's about it's going to vary. I mean, I have a very high success rate, but I would say maybe in the 70%. It's fairly high. I mean, it is a self-selecting group, right? Not everybody applies, but also you have to meet minimum standards to apply too, you know. So like if you have a 2.5, you can't apply for Navy, right? So right off the bat, you've eliminated yourself. I think it's more like getting a good application and getting it in early and doing that preparation. You know, like you need to be confident, you need to be mature, you need to be focused, you need to be eloquent. So you could be really smart, but really timid and not have those skills yet, you know, that your personality hasn't, you know, evolved yet. So maybe you wouldn't get the scholarship, even though you were qualified.
Yeah, and,
So, yeah,
a
there's a
different
set number
iteration.
each year, and when they run out, they run out.
Yeah, so a different iteration is like how many people get into the ROTC program but don't actually get the scholarship.
I would say that's the minority. So by the time like you commission, nearly everyone in a unit is on scholarship, you know, because they've either came in with one or they got one in college or they're getting some kind of incentive, you know, once they're there. So it's the vast majority. When I taught ROTC, the like we were in a unit with about 126 students, and I only had 2 seniors not on scholarship. One because they lost it because of academics, and then the other one never got one because his academics were low, you
Mhm,
know, but like all the other seniors, the other 20, you know, had it.
mhm.
Yeah.
And can you do ROTC out of community college or even grad school for that matter?
So you can do it at a community college if you're Air Force or Army. So you have to have an academic plan and you have to have a graduation date. So if when I was at Cal, I had a student at Diablo Valley College. She was there for 2 years doing econ, doing ROTC. She got into Cal, you know, then her scholarship was for Cal. So she competed for one for her last 2 years, just because the community college is so inexpensive. Like you're not going to use your scholarship, you know, they're not going to give you a scholarship for an associate's degree. What was the second question? I'm sorry.
Grad school.
Oh, grad school. So it varies by branch. Air Force has done a little bit with that, where you can come in and maybe have 2 years of undergrad and a year of grad school. So they've gone back and forth about that. So it's always worth talking to each unit. In my experience, Air Force has been the most flexible, a little bit with Army, not so much with Navy. But if you were going to grad school, the scholarship typically is not for grad school, it's for undergrad.
Okay.
Right. So sometimes somebody just wants the commission and they don't necessarily need the scholarship. Maybe they already have one.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
let's just say maybe you want to apply to military academies and ROTC. Is that suggested, and how would your timelines work?
Sure. So, you know, first you have to decide, is the academy a good fit for me? If it's not, I wouldn't spend the time and energy on it. Like your whole heart's got to be into that. Like you've got to do that for you. But I would say ROTC is such a great way of trying before you buy without that really huge life change. Um, but if you are applying to an academy, I think you should always consider applying for ROTC. The only time I don't have people not applying for ROTC, but are applying to an academy is typically if they don't need the money for ROTC. Maybe there's, you know, just not that financial need. In terms of doing that process for an academy, the first thing I have my students do is the congressional nominations, because you need to get endorsed, right, to get into an academy. And then I have them work on their ROTC scholarship along with their civilian school applications. Usually we pick like one academy and try to get that done after the nomination in the summer. But if they're applying to multiple things, we kind of have to break it out. But it's best to get that scholarship app in early. Like if you can do it in September, October, you know, November at the latest of senior year, that's going to give you the most opportunity. You know, and again, it's going to vary by program. Some programs have scholarship boards more frequently than others.
Mhm.
Right. You know, if you said I'm only applying for the Navy ROTC scholarship, that's not that much work. It's only like one scholarship along with your other colleges. So I would probably start that really early with you in the summer and try to get that in that September timeframe, because that could impact your admissions decisions.
Right. And do
Right.
you commission when you graduate?
Yeah. So everybody in ROTC is in it because they'll commission and then go active duty in that branch. Unless it's Army, you could go reserve or guard.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, I think we're about ready to wrap this up. You guys got any last minute questions? Actually, I did have a question. Actually, kind of unrelated. But I know you're very well versed in this as well. So sometimes when people submit a FAFSA,
Mhm.
or when they do submit a FAFSA, the males, they have to register for selective service in order to
Yes.
receive federal grants. Can you explain how that works? Because a lot of times when the parents are filling out the FAFSA, they see that question, they don't really know what it means and what the bottom line of all that would be.
Sure. So I worked for the Selective Service in the Air Force Reserves. That was my very last job. The Selective Service are basically the organization in the government that runs the draft in the event that we had a massive war and had to mobilize. So we have not mobilized in the United States since Vietnam. And after Vietnam, they totally changed the draft system to make it more equitable. So when you are a male in the US, unless you have a really profound disability, you are supposed to register with a selective service. So you go on the selective service page for registration. It takes about 3 minutes, and you're basically saying, this is who I am, where I live, and it just puts your name in this computer database. So again, even with like Iraq and Afghanistan, we have not mobilized since Vietnam. It's not you committing to going into the military, but it's saying, if our nation needs me, I know I need to register by law, but you can call up on me. And so registrars in high school are supposed to remind students when they turn 18. It doesn't always happen, but if you don't register, you're in violation of a law, which could catch up with you. You can't get financial aid without being registered as a male. And then if you go through high school and try to get certain government jobs, you're not eligible if you haven't registered with a selective service. And also if you get any government grants, not being registered prevents you from that. So there's definitely long-term implications. You do have to do it before you turn 26. But it's really important that boys do it, and then young men, sorry. And there's actually legislation in Congress to add women to that. So we'll kind of see what's going to happen with that. But yeah, they shouldn't be worried. It's not putting them in the military. It's just, keeping a record of who's eligible in the event that the government needed it.
Right, right. And yeah, I think I had one more, but if I got one, we know how to get you, Lisa. Really
Yes.
appreciate your time. And we're gonna wrap this up. You guys know how to reach her. And if you guys have any questions about this process, you can reach us both. All right, I'm gonna close out the webinar, guys. You have a good rest of the week. Take care.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.